Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ream Library at the College of the Holy Cross. I'm Father Brent Otto, and I'm Global Catholicism Fellow in the McFarland Center for Religion, Ethics, and Culture. The McFarland Center sponsors lectures, discussions, conferences, symposia, and conversations which foster dialogue on questions of meaning, morality, and mutual obligation, as well as initiatives to foster Jewish-Christian understanding and to deepen our understanding and awareness of Catholicism in a global frame. Tonight, we come together for the third lecture in the McFarland Center's fall series on Catholic resistance against authoritarianism. Throughout this series, we've been asking how faith, especially Catholic faith, can be a source of conscience, courage, and moral clarity in times when fear, nationalism, and indifference tend to shape the public life. Our guest tonight, Bishop Mark Seitz, embodies that kind of courage and courageous witness. He serves as the Bishop of El Paso, Texas, a diocese that stands right at the U.S.-Mexico border, a place where the realities of migration, poverty, and human dignity are lived out every day. He also chairs the U.S. Bishops' Committee on Migration, helping to guide the Church's response to one of the most urgent moral issues in our time. In 2017, Bishop Seitz wrote a remarkable pastoral letter entitled "Sorrow and Mourning Flee Away," a reference to Isaiah 51. In it, he names that the fear that hardens hearts against migrants and refugees, and he called instead for a revolution of tenderness rooted in the gospel. That letter has become one of the most prophetic Catholic voices on migration in our times in this country, clear, compassionate, and deeply grounded in Catholic social teaching. Bishop Seitz reminds us that migration is not only a political or social challenge, it's a theological one. To encounter the migrant, he writes, is to encounter Christ himself, the God who crosses borders to dwell with the vulnerable. Tonight, as he speaks on God, migration, and the struggle for human dignity, Bishop Seitz brings the perspective of a pastor who ministers daily at the intersection of faith and the complex realities of migration. His presence invites us to reflect on what the Church's witness to human dignity looks like when fear, inequality, and the movement of peoples test the boundaries of compassion and of justice. From his years of leadership in El Paso and his national role guiding the Church's work on migration, Bishop Seitz has offered a consistent reminder that the measure of our faith is found in how we see and respond to the most vulnerable. His example calls us to consider how the Church can be a voice of conscience and of hope in a divided world. Please join me in welcoming to the podium this evening Bishop Mark Seitz.
Thank you so very much. Good evening, everyone. I guess I should turn on my microphone. I'm very delighted to be here with you today. I want to thank Father Brent, Father Andrew, and certainly President Rougeau, all of you, for the wonderful welcome I've received here. It's really good to be with you at a college I've heard of for so many years, and finally I have the chance to visit. I want to express my gratitude for organizing this series of lectures on the important themes of Catholicism, authoritarianism, and moral courage. Needless to say, at this moment in our nation's history, it's very important for our Catholic universities to take up the challenge of bridging faith, public life, and the need for a moral response in a credible and coherent way. And I'm grateful for this space. grateful for the opportunity and the service it affords for your students and society. Mercifully for you, my time to speak this evening is limited. What I'd like to do in the next half hour is speak in broad strokes to the nature of the lecture series, especially as it relates to the challenges we face right now in our country around issues of migration. I'll speak to what's happening, how we should interpret it through a Catholic lens, and what we might need to do. And after that, I'd be very happy to enter into some dialogue with you and to plumb the matter a bit further. I've been very privileged over the last several years to lead the efforts of the bishops of the Catholic Church in the United States on the issue of migration as the chair of the Committee on Migration. Immigration has long been an issue of importance to the Catholic Church in the United States. We arrived, of course, in this country as an immigrant church. And each chapter of the Catholic Church here has been marked by new waves of newcomers. We built hospitals, grammar schools, social service agencies, and universities, like this one, to support the immigration of immigrants, or the integration of immigrants from Central and Southern Europe, from Latin America, and beyond. Over the decades, we resettled countless numbers of refugees, irrespective of religion, from all around the world, including many from Afghanistan, who assisted our armed forces during our invasion there, and were left vulnerable to persecution by the Taliban. And for decades now, the Catholic Church has advocated vigorously for the rights and dignity of those who came here seeking for a better life and to provide their children, and who every day contribute to the social and economic betterment of our country. That advocacy has long included work for comprehensive immigration reform and citizenship for those without documents. Of course, there are very legitimate debates regarding the most effective ways to manage immigration in the United States. The United States benefits greatly from immigration, as we have throughout our history, and there are many people around the world who continue to come here as tourists or in order to study, to work, or because they've fallen in love with an American citizen. There are also many people who, through no fault of their own, are forcibly displaced because of natural disasters or conflict or persecution or poverty and have no place else to go. As an important country on the world stage, we also have a certain degree of responsibility in meeting the needs of those who are forcibly displaced. This was brought home to us in a particular way in the United States in the wake of the Holocaust, when our country turned away Jewish refugee populations from our shores. Immigration is a fact of life, and this has always been true. And it's even more so in a globalized world. As such, it needs to be managed and regulated effectively and orderly and with due regard for security. And the responsibility for that ultimately lies with public servants. As a moral actor and a moral voice, the Catholic Church in the United States has not only contributed to the effort of welcoming and integrating those who come here, but through our advocacy also ensuring that we honor our national obligations to global solidarity by assisting refugees and vulnerable migrants, and that we treat all people who migrate, irrespective of their immigration status, in a manner befitting human dignity. Provided, of course, that we are meeting our basic obligations to global solidarity and the needs of refugees and honoring the overall social and economic contributions of migrants, there is legitimate room for debate as to how best to manage migration. How many visas should we distribute every year? How do we promote economic vitality and innovation while also ensuring just wages and sufficient work opportunities for those born here? How do we ensure that the burden of meeting the needs of the world's refugee community is shared, shouldered, equitably, including by other countries? How do we build a global strategy to meet the needs of those who will be displaced by climate change? What are the best metrics to measure border security? How do we grapple with the intersection of immigration and questions of race and gender? How do we enforce immigration law ethically and humanely? What are the connections between immigration and our foreign policy interventions abroad? No one necessarily has a corner on the solutions, and neither Democrats nor Republicans or independents. These are important questions, and we need smart people like you to help answer them. That's the purpose of politics, to work through public policy challenges. The problem is this: we haven't been working through many aspects of those public policy challenges in a long time. Critical questions of asylum at the border, how to effectively regularize the long-term contributing population without documents as a matter of both justice and the common good, and a forward-thinking system about meeting the evolving labor needs of our country. The truth is that all these important questions have been off the table for some time. Decades, in fact. Elected leaders haven't succeeded in meeting the moment. You can blame either or both political parties. There's plenty of culpability to be shared all around. Worse yet, the vacuum left behind by that indecision is now occupied by a feverish politics of exclusion, driven by demonization and hate. Thus, at this point, we're beyond the scope of mere policy differences. This is what we've done. We've shut down the border entirely to the vulnerable. We've eroded the U.S. refugee program as we've known it. Or I should say we've ended it. We are funding the immigration enforcement, detention, and deportation machine at such a level that ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is now the largest federal law enforcement agency in the country, with a budget that exceeds the national defense spending of many countries. We are ramping up a mass deportation campaign, which is being effectuated indiscriminately and mercilessly, with no regard for community ties, how long someone may have been here, or their contributions. And in a troublingly increasing number of cases, we are doing so without considering whether someone may in fact have permission to be in this country, either because they have parole or TPS, temporary protected status, a pending asylum case, or some other legal status. We are tearing mothers and fathers from their children with brutal indifference. I am convinced that the long-term damage to our moral health from such actions has not yet sufficiently registered. I think our Holy Father, Pope Leo XIV, recently expressed this dynamic of going beyond legitimately public policy concerns and differences well in a recent speech. He said, "States have the right and the duty to protect their borders, but this should be balanced by the moral obligations to provide refuge. With the abuse of vulnerable migrants, we are witnessing not the legitimate exercise of national sovereignty, but rather grave crimes committed or tolerated by the state. Ever more inhumane measures are being adopted, even celebrated politically. Treat these undesirables as if they were garbage and not human beings. Christianity, on the other hand, refers to the God who is love, who creates us and calls us to live as brothers and sisters." End of quote. That core moral intuition that we are all brothers and sisters is at the heart of the Church's advocacy for those who migrate. We are called to reasonably steward the resources of the earth, to meet the needs of all, including those forced to migrate. We are called to honor the image of God present in all those making the journey from the edges of our societies to the center, who are looking to contribute, to participate, and to belong. Immigration is not principally a political question, but a profoundly moral one, and even a religious one. Now, in this lecture series, you've identified authoritarianism as a particular area of moral challenge in our country at present. And I think that's correct. I think we see it expressed in a number of domains, including the realm of migration. Let me offer some examples. As I mentioned previously, the inability of elected leaders to address immigration legislatively means that more and more decisions in this area are being made by executive fiat. The fate of dreamers, TPS holders, asylum seekers, and other significant populations is more and more subject to the political whims of one person. This is reflective of a disturbing atrophy of the democratic process, one which opens the door to authoritarian tendencies. Sometimes, under the cover of declarations of wartime and emergency powers, the administration is deploying the military and surging personnel from other law enforcement agencies and even other administrative agencies, such as the IRS, to execute on immigration policy. Another point, the administration is applying immigration enforcement in a nakedly partisan and vengeful fashion, with high-profile operations targeted to democratic strongholds such as Los Angeles, Chicago, and Portland. The administration, furthermore, is disregarding due process and other basic constitutional and civil rights afforded to all present in our country, based upon the Constitution and Bill of Rights. The administration is eroding the independence of the immigration courts by tying the hands of judges, replacing judges with whom they disagree, and routinely ignoring the decisions of immigration judges by scandalously arresting migrants in the very context of immigration proceedings. I've seen it with my own eyes. Immigration enforcement agents routinely engage in constitutionally questionable operations without judicial warrants, without showing identification, and without showing their faces. The agencies have acknowledged their use of racial profiling in open court. The co-optation of our immigration enforcement system by moneyed interests is patently obvious, with an increasing number of privately operated immigration detention centers. In the same vein, there are disturbing links between powerful moneyed interests and the increasing use of invasive surveillance technologies in the immigration enforcement space, including artificial intelligence, which itself raises complex moral concerns. As Pope Leo has noted, there are deep questions regarding the proper use of technology in generating more authentically just and human global society. Nor can we ignore the drumbeat of dehumanizing language used to describe people who have migrated, utilized by this administration. That's just for starters. I could go on. There is no need to argue that each of these examples is corrosive of democracy and public trust. The cancerous growth of extraordinary and constitutionally questionable powers at the expense of the dignity of those who migrate is before all our eyes to witness. And it won't stop with one class of human beings. Look, for example, at how quickly our leaders have been to sacrifice SNAP benefits for the poor. It won't stop with them either. Now, what are we to do? In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus uses the parable of the Good Samaritan to describe who is worthy of our moral concern and action. You know the story. There is a wounded man on the side of the road, ignored by those with special responsibility not to ignore him, the priest and the Levite. It is someone from an ostracized social group, a Samaritan, who pays attention. Thus is the reign of God built up, one human interaction at a time. One person who chooses to pay attention at a time. And more than that, Jesus identifies himself with the wounded man. So in paying attention to the wounded person, we pay attention to Jesus. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. When governments and politicians and those who form opinion abandon the wounded person on the side of the road, when there is no one else to pay attention, then that is where the church needs to be. Among those in power, there are few in the corner of the poor and vulnerable today. We all have eyes to see what is happening right now. The breaking of car windows, the use of force against ordained ministers protesting outside detention centers, the pinning of mothers on the ground, the abducting of people from vehicles and immigration courts. It is visible for us all to see and floods our social media feeds. But who is paying attention? I've spoken in the past about what we need to do. Radical solidarity, radical love in public, in support of our sisters and brothers in need. Mutual aid, commitment to justice, commitment to reform. A church, as Pope Francis said, that takes risks and is in the streets. And we need to speak the truth. It's important that the church do that. Cardinal John Henry Newman, as you may know, was recently made a doctor of the church. Cardinal Newman spent so much of his life in the university, and he was devoted to the truth, wherever it might take him. He once wrote, "There is not only a time to keep silence, but a time to speak. And in some states of society, such as our own, it is the worst charity and the most provoking, irritating rule of action and the most unhappy policy not to speak out, not to suffer, to be spoken out. All that there is to say. Such speaking out is under such circumstances that the triumph of religion Such speaking out is under such circumstances the triumph of religion, whereas concealment, accommodation, and evasion is to cooperate with the spirit of error. But our action and our speaking the truth must start with paying attention. Earlier last month, I had the opportunity to visit with the new Pope Leo XIV. I did this because this year our local Catholic human rights organization, the Hope Border Institute, began to receive hundreds and hundreds of letters, some for me and some for the Holy Father, from people all around the country affected by the current situation. Many undocumented, many part of families with one or more members without documents. The letters speak to the fear and the anxiety in the immigrant community right now. And not only fear, but hope and resilience, and how immigrants want to continue to contribute to be a part of our communities. From those letters, members of the immigrant community crafted a video that brought together the different themes and many citations. So we went to Rome, and we gave the Pope the letters and showed him the video. I felt that it was a very solemn responsibility to carry these voices to the Vicar of Christ. He listened deeply. He paid attention. He watched the video with compassion. I think that's where we need to start. We need to allow ourselves to be moved by these stories. We need to be moved by the fears and the hopes of our neighbors. This is how the reign of God is built. One voice, one relationship at a time. I'd like to show you that video right now, only 4 minutes, and then we can have a conversation.
Come to you in the midst of a heavy trial. Escúchanos.
We are a voice woven from the prayers, hopes, and tears of immigrant communities across the United States, from California to Texas, Iowa, North Carolina, and beyond.
Many of us were forced to leave behind everything that was most precious: family, home, the communities that gave us a sense of belonging, and the land where our children played and learned.
Now, when deportations strike, the loss is repeated. Family bonds are broken, communities are scattered, and our children are stripped of safety, health, and education.
We live in a state of constant anxiety, never knowing if tomorrow will bring separation. If the lives we work so hard to build will be stripped from us. If we will be sent to countries where we were born but did not grow, to countries we fled and the countries we have never known.
Esta cultura del descarte nos mata.
When will anxiety stop being our way of life? When we'll be able to live in peace?
Our faith pushes us to contribute to our family, our community, and to our world. We put food on people's tables. We build cities and roads. We care for the sick and elderly.
We carry pride in the work of our hands, in caring for our communities and this land we now inhabit, in our endurance through hardship, and in our determination to keep going when everything seems lost.
We bring joy, color, and life to our communities.
We keep the sacred flame of faith burning.
Our resilience is our testimony. We know our dignity comes from God alone, and though others may deny it, it cannot be taken from us.
We have hope in our God, for He walks with us.
Porque Dios también huyó y buscó refugio.
Holy Father, sisters, and brothers in the Church in the United States, we now ask you to walk with us too.
Speak loudly with us to proclaim that we are children of God and not disposable.
Walk with us and let us together build a society that embraces and celebrates everyone for who they are, where all can thrive.
Together, let us be a church that refuses to abandon its people, one that walks in faith, justice, and love.
Acompáñenos a construir un mundo que de verdad es para todos y todas.
I hope it moved you as it certainly did our Holy Father. When he heard it, he said, he pointed out the powerlessness that people have suffered and that they express in those letters. And I think maybe a lot of us have felt the same way. It's like we're facing a tsunami of actions that, I don't know, at least speaking for myself, I never thought we'd see in our country. But the Holy Father said, in matters of injustice, the church has to speak. And we're going to attempt to do that to the best of our ability, and that doesn't only mean bishops. It means all of us, the baptized members of the church. I think it's a time to speak, and if we can't get moved by what's going on right now, it worries me a lot for us as a church and for us as a nation. But enough said from me, unless, of course, you ask me to say something else. And so now is an opportunity for any things that you'd like to know a little bit more about that I might be able to assist with or clarify.
I'd invite those who have questions to come up to the microphone so you'll be heard by everybody in the room. And if you need to make a little bit of a line behind the microphone, that's fine too.
Maybe I just answered all the questions.
I'm a member of the Catholic Workwomen's Zidon.
I think so.
Ready? No. We're not sure that it's working, but I have a loud enough voice. I'm a member of the Catholic Worker, and about a quarter of the people that have come to us looking for shelter are undocumented people. And as part of the Catholic Worker, I've been in many of the countries where they have come from, and all too often I've seen the causes that drive them from their country are exported from our own in terms of exploitation, military adventures, and the environmental effects of climate change. And yet today in the news, the former head of the Department of Governmental Efficiency, Elon Musk, was voted by the shareholders to receive the largest paycheck in American history for his work for his company. A paycheck large enough to probably give a decent living to thousands of individuals. And yet, even in this context of fantastic wealth concentration in the top 1%, the powers have been able to turn most working class white Americans angry at immigrants, that they were the ones robbing their futures and taking away their jobs and so on. How can we reverse this trend so people can understand it's not the problem of immigrants, it's the problem of grotesque and obscene wealth without conscience?
Wow, that's a $20 billion question. I think it really is a concern. It ought to be a major concern for all of us that the difference between the wealthy and the poor is ever increasing. And it's not just a matter of who's willing to work and not work. You know, it's just that it's more than that. It's that some people have opportunities that other people really don't. And so how do you deal with that, especially when those who are entrusted with such, ridiculous levels of wealth aren't willing to share it? We believe as Catholics that we have an obligation to share what we don't need. That's in Catholic teaching. But that message has not gotten to a lot of people in the world, and it's the stuff that foments violence in societies eventually. I hope and pray that it won't come to that before there's an awakening somehow in our country. But I think we really have to look at the economic instabilities or the factors that are leading to instability that are so deeply rooted in our country and in our world right now.
Thank you for speaking to us. Early on, you mentioned that the United States refused to offer refuge to Jews fleeing after World War II.
Not after, during.
Well, during, but also after. There was a lot of resistance. And what that reminded me of was what's been a concern of mine all through this, that in those days, Germany found a population that they could scapegoat. And we're seeing the replay of that here. And the predicament that we are all in now is, you know, I remember when I was much younger, we used to talk about why did the good Germans let this happen? I'm now thinking the good Americans aren't letting it happen. We haven't figured out how to stop it, and we're afraid to try. And I hear you saying, well, we've got to go ahead and try.
That's right. That's right. We really do. And I think we have to think deeply about these issues too. Please don't hear me saying that one party has the answers. I really don't believe they do. We were facing threats to religious liberty, serious threats, when the Democrats had the White House and the Congress. And in a certain way, many actions of Democrats opened the way to what we're seeing now, where executive power was taken during their terms as well. So we really need to step back, I think, and think clearly through this, and not just look to one part of or the other to have the solutions. Why don't we? I've got an idea. Why don't we try a Christian and a Catholic answer sometime? At least to guide our policy actions. Let's try that. You know, I'm trying to remember. I think it might have been Chesterton who said, "It's not that Christianity has been tried and failed. It's just that it's never been tried." Anyone else? Sure.
Why do you think that church pastors are reluctant to make people in the pews uncomfortable by talking about tough issues like this? And what can be done about that?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. And I think that the answer is complex, right? It's not just one thing. One is that we've always been taught to stay out of politics, right? And now what we've done is we've made these fundamental moral issues into political issues. You know, I like to say that the immigration issue was a gospel issue before it was a political issue, right? You know, the church has always spoken to this and always called people to their responsibility towards the poor, which of course includes immigrants. So that's part of it. And part of it is, of course, a fear of alienating members in the pew. And frankly, Protestants are more prey to that, Protestant pastors, more prey than Catholic pastors because they're more beholden to the congregation. I'm not trying to criticize them, I'm just saying that's the way they're structured. Catholics have a bit more freedom because we don't elect our pastors, in case you haven't noticed. You know, priests, I think there's a kind of certain selection process for priests that sort of selects those who want to be loved, right? And not to hurt people's feelings. And so the John the Baptist part of us has a hard time coming out. I wish I had some easy answers.
The remedy for worry and anxiety over the state of the world is to take what little actions we can, and there's an action that everyone in this room can take today. A big part of the problem in this country is the enormous wealth inequality. We all contribute to that by patronizing businesses whose leaders accumulate billions in personal wealth. We could start to stop that today by refusing to patronize, by boycotting these businesses.
Something to think about. Yes, I'm glad to see some students stepping up here.
Have you had productive faith-based conversations with other people, other Catholic people perhaps, who don't share a similar stance on migration as you do, and how have you gone about that, and how can we go about that?
Very good questions. No. I'm still trying to learn. And I'll tell you what I know, at least in my head, is the most important way I can get through. And I have seen some success. And that is, I can't just argue on an intellectual level with them. I have to tell them stories. And better yet, I have to help them know an immigrant. If I can do that, it's amazing. They can turn on a dime because the whole house of cards of what they thought about immigrants falls down. That's what I'm trying.
Thank you. So during these past couple years, during your ministry, has there been any specific encounters in your life that have stood out to you, and have perhaps maybe you've shared with other people?
Would you repeat? Has there been any
meaningful encounters or moments that have stayed with you during?
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! So many. Thanks for the question. Didn't have time in my half-hour talk to tell you many stories. I'll tell you one that I love to think back about, and it's so encouraging to me. This was back in the end of the first Trump administration, when the border was first effectively shut down. Do you remember the migration protocols that basically said nobody can cross? We're going to make a waiting list, and it just so many a day, you know. So it shut down. I became aware of a family who had been trying to cross and was in great need. They're from Honduras. Mother, father, 3 children. The middle daughter, who was 4 years old, had a heart condition she was born with. She had surgery in Honduras when she was born, but she was desperately in need of a follow-up surgery that could only be done in our country. While they were waiting to cross, this family was kidnapped, not once, but twice. Somehow they were freed. And then the daughter had a heart attack. She was brought to the hospital, and the doctor said she really needs treatment. And so we said to ourselves, what can we do? You know, there was something written into the protocols that said that people who had particular needs, urgent needs, could be allowed across, but they had been turned away. So we came up with a crazy plan to go across, myself and a group of people, and we would inform the media that we were doing it. And we would walk them across the border. I was scared to death. And really, I didn't have that much reason. I mean, how much can they do to a bishop, right? But, you know, there were really frightening times, even then. And so I go across, meet this family, pray with them, and then we start walking for the bridge. And as I said, I was just about shaking. And I was worried for me, but I was very worried for them. You know, what if we failed? And what would happen to this family? So as we start out, all of a sudden, a little hand reaches out and takes me. It's the 10-year-old daughter, Celia. She takes my hand, I look at her, she looks at me, she smiles. And suddenly I felt okay. And I said to her, "Vamos a marchar. Es un desfile. Let's march across. This is a parade." And with new energy, we walked right up that bridge to the border guards. And, we stopped there, of course, and we were stopped, and it took a long time. But to make a longer story short, eventually we got them across, you know. But that just little moment, that hand meant so much to me. It spurred me on well beyond the bridge.
Thank you for your time here today and for shedding light on such an important issue such as immigration. With immigration being such a big issue and people being snatched off the streets, such as Kilmar Brego Garcia, who was snatched off the streets, denied his constitutional rights, and wrongly deported by this administration to a country where he faced imminent threats, I'd like to hear your perspective on how do we make elected leaders meet the moment and how do we stop immigration from being seen as a partisan issue? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, the first answer that comes to my mind is vote. You know, get involved in the political process. And let's see if we can find some candidates that will really be conscientious servants of the people. You know, not to say there aren't some already, but there's so much pressure on them and so many things that, you know, leave them, have them leaving behind what they really believe. That, and I really appreciate the last part of your question. How can we convince them it's not a partisan issue? And that, I think, is absolutely so important. This should transcend Republican or Democrat. It should transcend politics itself, because it's basic decision for Christians to be disciples of Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's what it is. So don't worry about a political position. Worry about whether you're a faithful disciple and call other people to that. And the rest, I suspect, will take care of itself.
So as students at a university and people who live in the U.S., we're obviously very privileged. So
Speak loudly, okay, because I suspect the people.
As people who live in the U.S. and people who are obtaining a higher education, obviously we're very privileged in many ways. And I was just wondering what your piece of advice would be for how we can use that privilege to help those who are unprivileged.
Wonderful. First of all, recognize that you're privileged. You know, what a privilege it is. And with privilege comes responsibility, right? Don't see it as, don't take the credit to yourself, but recognize it as a blessing, ultimately a blessing from God. But God doesn't give blessings without also calling us to a response. And so think about that deeply. How can you serve? Not only serve, but know the poor, know the immigrants, so that the blessing you've had becomes a blessing to them. Short answer.
You say that neither party has all the answers. How do you go about causing political change considering the influence of large individual donors and corporate super PACs in our elections?
Yeah. Well, there's just so much messed up in our system, isn't there? And, you know, I'm not suggesting we throw the baby out with the bathwater. I really believe in our American system. But democracy doesn't take care of itself. It takes a lot of work. It takes an informed citizenry, and it takes a willingness to give of ourselves. You know, we talk about this in regard to our military might, you know, and all of the people that have sacrificed their life so that we can live free, right? And whatever arguments we might have about that, I'd like to make the point that it's not simply by taking up a gun that you defend this country, but it's the responsibility of every citizen to get involved, to read, to learn, to study and to act. And of course, here I am biased, but learn your faith, because there's so much beautiful guidance there that's just so fundamental. And our country was built on that. You know, it was built on those centuries of revelation and learning that formed the Judeo-Christian heritage that became, in some ways, this amazing experiment in democracy.
What do you think can be done about like the situation in Chicago where they don't allow priests into detention centers?
Okay, thanks. I think we can overcome that. Now, there are ways to do it. I'm not sure that their tactics were always helpful. Maybe they called a lot of attention to the issue, but we're not going to force ourselves in the detention center, right? You know, we've got to get permission. So in El Paso, we've been working for weeks to receive permission to go in, and finally our quiet diplomacy is bearing some fruits. They're building, you know, if you know Texans, you know we're very proud of being the biggest everything. There's one thing we're not proud of right now, at least I'm not. And we're building the biggest detention center in the country in El Paso. It's now at 3,000 people. It will soon be 5,000. And their ultimate goal is to bring it to 10,000 people. Imagine that they'll be processing through there as they deport them. And these are not going to be criminals. You know, right now, only about a third or less have been convicted of a crime. Right? That means 2/3 were living here in peace. So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Where was I going? The question? Yes, thank you. Sorry. So yeah, I think we need to work with them. And sometimes we need to go public, like they did, for instance, in Florida, at the so-called alligator Alcatraz. Did you hear what happened there? The Archbishop got on his motorcycle. I don't have one of them. But he got on his motorcycle with Knights of Columbus on bikes. And he went down there into the Everglades and prayed a rosary. But when word got out about that, it called a lot of attention to the fact that that's as far as they were able to get. And eventually that place opened itself up. So we've got to be smart. I think we're making some headway in that regard.
excuse me for coming up a second time, but I
Oh,
wanted
dear.
to mention some local events for
Yes,
people.
okay.
There's a weekly demonstration at Lincoln Square in Worcester. We're going for years for peace and for justice for migrants. There is a weekly demonstration at the Federal Building right downtown at noon every Friday. And there is a march tomorrow organized from Holy Cross. Our bishop will be there tomorrow afternoon. You can go and make a statement for this issue there with a relatively low cost from yourselves. And there's the largest detention center in this county is in the northern part of the county, and there have been weekly demonstrations there for 10 weeks with no fewer than 300 and as many as 500 people.
Wow.
Imagine if there had been 500 people outside of Auschwitz saying that this is not what should be done in Germany. So there's hopeful stuff out there, and there are ways to get involved locally at all kinds of levels so that we can stand. And politicians will tell you, when they see people standing on the street corners in large numbers, it gives them the courage because they feel they have backing for issues. They feel there's people with them, and they're not going to be standing out in the cold when they say something like this. So it has a multiplicity of power for you to go do these things.
Say where and what time
Tomorrow the event is at 3 on the Common, and it'll be a silent prayer with religious leaders offering prayers at different points. And I guess they're
And
leading
it
the
begins
campus.
here at 1:30 with Bishop Seitz and the chaplain's office staff in front of St. Joseph Chapel. And then there'll be, for anyone who wants to join, there's the option to walk all the way to the Common or to take buses that Holy Cross has arranged.
Perfect.
See you there.
Perfect.
Do we have time for more? Or?
Yeah, are there any further questions that anybody would like to ask? We probably have room for another one or two.
Yes, thank you, Bishop, I really appreciate your remarks and, excuse me, in particular, talking about Catholic social teaching, moral responsibility. So what's been really bothering me in all of this is that many of these people that are really excited about this policy of not showing dignity to people, they're Catholics, Christians, but many are Catholics. So I'm just curious if there has been any kind of movement to kind of teach them that they're not following. I mean, particularly talking that empathy is a bad thing. I mean,
right.
And that's Christianity. So I'm just curious.
Okay, thank you for raising that. Yeah, I think we've fallen prey to the fallacy that in order to live in a secular society, that we need to separate faith from action. And that's a heresy. That's a terrible heresy, you know. Faith is not faith if it's not lived. That's simple. And nobody gets a pass, especially politicians. Now, it's not to say, of course, that you don't listen to others' opinions and you have a respectful dialogue on every level. But if you can't be an elected official who is true to your principles, then really, I don't think anybody should trust you. You know? Because you're just going to blow with the wind. What's the latest poll? You know? What's the latest popular thing? You know? We fall into that fallacy, and it's hurt our country in so many ways.
I don't really have a question as much as a comment.
You have a good comment?
Also, we've been talking about how to effect change, but I think it's also very personal in that there are so many immigrants, particularly in the Worcester area. I really have taken up the habit of when I meet someone from another country saying, "Where are you from?" "Oh, Ghana. I've met so many wonderful people here from Ghana. I'm so glad you're here."
Oh,
yeah. And I just wanted to do it as a personal practice to help people feel that somebody in this country who's born here and white and speaks good American English cares. And I think we might all do that.
Beautiful. What a blessing immigrants are among us. How do we even come to know ourselves if we can't see and appreciate the other? You know, we need to see something besides our face in the mirror. You know, it's a richness that we have in this country of immigrants. Mm-hmm. So I thank you so much. Thank you, President Biden.
Thank you very much for joining us, for visiting our campus for the first time, for sharing us your perspective in El Paso on this issue that affects all of us so deeply in our democracy. Thank you for your solidarity with us, to come so far, to be with us, to call us to a deeper solidarity with our brothers and sisters. And thank you in advance for joining with our students and the wider community to begin this prayer witness tomorrow afternoon.
If I could just ask you all to, if you would be so kind, keep me in your prayers, please. I'm going from here to the Bishops' Conference fall meeting, bishops from around the country, and my task is, my last act in my term as chair of the Migration Committee is to try and get a statement out of them. And it's not a matter of, you know, they don't agree about the seriousness of this. It's just the complexity with 300 bishops to get us all to agree on a set of words. Pray for us, okay?